Over the past 4 years, the American dream has turned into a nightmare for millions of people, especially for renters. Remember in 2021 and 2022, landlords were exploiting the opportunity they had, acting like ruthless dictators. Rents were increasing by nearly 20%, 30%, and even 50% in some places overnight. People were going from auction to auction trying to find a place to live, helpless against the power of landlords, forced to spend nearly half their paychecks on those neglected homes. That's the market, take it or leave it, they were told. If you don't like it, the door is right there. There are dozens waiting in line, they were told. Back then, landlords and big investment companies thought this system would last forever. High demand, huge returns, and a never-ending dream. During this period, contractors turned the entire city into a construction site. Everywhere there were construction sites, cranes, and buildings going up, with fancy signs promising people luxury living, residences, and exclusive life. Everyone lined up to get a piece of the pie. Wall Street giants, pension funds, even individual investors, they were all queuing up to find their place in this system, thinking, let's build houses, someone will rent them anyway. But there was one truth they had forgotten. The economy is like a rubber band. The harder you pull it in one direction, the harder it snaps back in the other. And that moment arrived. The rubber was ready to snap. Okay, if you're ready, let's move on to our video. First, you can mention and discuss in the comments any predictions or regions you're curious about or expect to see on the list. This is important for our community. So if you're ready, let's begin. The calendar reads 2026, and the wind has shifted direction sharply in the United States real estate market. Those arrogant homeowners had fallen silent. Real estate offices that used to keep people waiting at their doors now had tenants lining up at theirs. They were offering promotions to potential tenants as if begging them. Please come. We don't require a deposit. Don't pay rent for the first 2 months. We'll even cover your moving expenses. What happened? How did everything turn upside down? How could all this be explained? The answer was simple. The harshest rule of capitalism had come into play: oversupply. Now, those massive, luxurious properties, which had cost billions of dollars, were finished, and it was time for all of them to hit the market. But at the same time, there was a problem. There was no community left to fill these luxury buildings, these expensive properties. Inflation had crippled the people, wages had evaporated, and those luxury buildings were now ghost museums. Today, we will travel across America with you. But this is not a tourist trip. We will visit the 10 most striking states where the rental bubble burst most loudly, landlords panicked and slashed prices, and tenants finally got their revenge. This list is not randomly selected. It is a painful map of greed, unplanned growth, and disconnect from economic realities. So, if you're ready, we're heading to where the collapse began, to the 10th spot on the list. Georgia. At number 10 on the list is Georgia, considered one of the most important economic centers in the American South, the New York of the South. Especially its capital, Atlanta. Atlanta has undergone an incredible transformation over the past decade. Once home only to Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines, the city has now earned the title Hollywood of the South. Big-budget Marvel movies, Netflix series, major productions. They all flocked here because of tax incentives. Along with these productions, thousands of actors, technical crews, directors, and white-collar professionals have come to the city. Construction companies saw this as a gold mine. In Atlanta's famous Midtown and Buckhead areas, they built 40-story, 50-story luxury residences on almost every vacant lot they could find. They built a Starbucks at the base of each building and a pool on the roof, equipped the gyms with the most expensive equipment. They created a living space that even the old-school Arnold Schwarzenegger would love. Their target audience was clear: the newly arrived, wealthy, luxury-loving segment of society, the so-called new generation of rich people. In 2021 and 2022, business was booming. Rents had increased by an average of 20%, and even 1+1 apartments were selling like hotcakes for $2,500. During this period, contractors said this demand would never end and built more real estate and luxury buildings, with cranes rising on all vacant lots in the city. However, there is an important detail. By 2024 and 2025, the scenario had changed. First, the Hollywood strikes hit the industry hard. Then filming was postponed and halted, and film crews had already begun to leave the cities. Major tech companies started laying off employees. The key detail here is that all these luxury apartments and properties had been completed while all this was happening. These days, when you walk the streets of Atlanta, you encounter a strange scene. Newly built, gleaming luxury buildings, marble-clad lobbies, and valets waiting at the door. But when evening comes, there is no trace of this glitz. Most of the windows are dark and show no sign of life. Here we come to the important part: the data. According to estimates, the number of new homes to be completed and put on the market in Atlanta in 2026 will be at an all-time high. We call this a supply wave, but it's more like a tsunami than a wave. Homeowners are panicking because the prices of apartments they once wanted for $2,500 have now dropped to $1,800, even $1,700. But the problem doesn't end with price cuts. Apartment management companies in Atlanta have now entered a race to offer concessions to attract tenants. Move in with us and we'll cover your first 2 months' rent. No membership fees and free parking. We're giving away Amazon gift cards. Some buildings are even offering real estate agents up to $5,000 in commissions to bring in tenants. Why? Because if these luxury buildings remain vacant, the fund companies that built them cannot repay their bank loans. A vacant apartment is a wound that bleeds money every month, and Atlanta is now seeking surgical intervention for these wounds. Take a look at this detail, especially in the crowded neighborhoods around the popular walking path that surrounds the city, known as the Beltline. Everywhere is now covered with for rent signs, and there is a significant decrease of 3 to 5% annually in rental prices across Georgia. Interestingly, this is an average figure. In the luxury segment, such as poolside residences, the decline is nearly 10%. For investors, the Georgia dream is now a thing of the past. For them, the Hollywood of the South has now turned into a horror movie set. But this is not true for everyone. For tenants, a period is beginning where, for the first time in years, they have the upper hand at the negotiating table. North Carolina. Yes, we are in 9th place on the list, a state that once rivaled New York as America's financial and banking center, especially with its 2 major cities, Charlotte and Raleigh-Durham. The story of this state is actually one of excessive confidence. Charlotte is home to the headquarters of Bank of America. Raleigh is the Research Triangle, an area known for its technology and pharmaceutical companies. During the pandemic, this was the #1 destination for white-collar workers fleeing New York, Boston, and California. Why? Because it was affordable, had a mild climate, and offered excellent job opportunities. You can probably guess the dollar signs that appear in investors' eyes when they see this migration. They called this place the new Silicon Valley and the new Wall Street. And they did the same thing here as in Georgia, only bigger. They filled city centers and suburbs with massive apartment blocks. This is Charlotte's famous South End district, once filled with breweries and art galleries, but suddenly overflowing with 5 to 6-story luxury homes and cookie-cutter apartment buildings. But there was one important factor: banking sector crises and interest rate hikes. When high interest rates hit the banking sector in 2024 and 2025, hiring in Charlotte was slashed. The slowdown in the tech sector hit Raleigh. The influx of white-collar workers to the city slowed down and even stopped, and some even started to return. But construction didn't stop. Once a construction project starts, you can't just leave it halfway. Those tens of thousands of apartments whose foundations had been laid had to be completed, and they all started hitting the market in late 2025 and early 2026. The result? A massive oversupply. Currently, in Charlotte and Raleigh, the number of vacant apartments per tenant is at its highest in the last 20 years. Landlords are stunned. But this is a banking hub. This place won't go under, they said. But what they forgot was this. No matter how popular a city is, if 100 people move there and you build 200 homes, prices have to fall. Math is emotionless. Math is ruthless. What is happening in North Carolina right now is a complete correction. Rents, especially for those luxury studio apartments in the city center, are in free fall. Discounts of 4%, 5%, and even 8% in some specific buildings are flying around. More interestingly, the detached rental homes market in this state is also taking a hit. Wall Street firms had bought up thousands of detached homes in this region and put them up for rent. Now those homes are starting to sit empty because people are flocking to apartments when they see the discounts there. In short, North Carolina's steady rise graph has been broken. For investors, this is no longer a guaranteed profit opportunity, but a stop-loss point. Charlotte's skyscrapers may still be shining, but the rental signs in their shadows scream the true face of the economy. Tennessee. In 8th place on the list is the pandemic's troublemaker, America's party capital, Tennessee, and its shining star, Nashville. Nashville's story is one of recklessness. Recall the pandemic era. While New York and California were shut down, Nashville kept its doors wide open. People flocked here to escape restrictions, have fun, and feel freedom. The city suddenly became America's bachelor party capital. Broadway was packed every night. Real estate investors and Airbnb entrepreneurs, seeing this wild crowd, descended on Nashville like it was a gold rush. In popular areas of the city like the Gulch and Music Row, skyscrapers were built on every vacant square meter. Their goal wasn't just to rent homes to locals. Their goal was to sell apartments for $500 a night to tourists coming for the weekend parties. The short-term rental frenzy changed the city's DNA. Rents increased by over 30% in 2 years. Local musicians, waiters, the people who made the city what it was, were forced to leave the city due to rising rents. But every party must come to an end, and for Nashville, that morning was very painful. By 2025, 3 things happened simultaneously. 1. Tourism slowed down. Due to inflation, people can no longer afford to come party every weekend. 2. Legal regulations. In response to public outcry, city officials imposed strict restrictions on short-term rentals. 3. A supply glut. Tens of thousands of luxury apartments built in anticipation of tourists coming were completed. What's happening in Nashville right now is a full-blown stock shock. Those luxury apartments that couldn't be rented out on Airbnb were forced back into the long-term rental market. Thousands of empty homes suddenly flooded the market. Investors who calculated they would earn $3,000 a month are now praying to find tenants at $1,800. Walking around Nashville, you'll see new signs added next to the famous "First month's rent on us" banners. Moving expenses on us. 3 months of free Netflix. Free gym membership. Competition among landlords has gotten so fierce that they're trying to steal each other's tenants. Rents across Tennessee are down about 4% year over year. But in downtown Nashville, that decline is pushing 7%. The music may still be playing, but for investors, that melody is no longer a cheerful country song. It's a sad farewell kiss. Washington. In 7th place on the list is Washington State, America's tech hub and home to Amazon and Microsoft, with its heart in Seattle. Seattle's decline is different from the others. Here, the problem isn't just too many homes being built. Here, the problem is people leaving. For years, Seattle was America's fastest growing, most expensive, and hardest to find housing elite city. Tech engineers flocked to the city with their 6-figure salaries, snapping up studio apartments for $3,000. But then came the remote work revolution and the subsequent tech layoffs. Amazon, Microsoft, and other tech giants laid off thousands of employees. Once the requirement to work in the office was lifted, people asked themselves, why should I live in a tiny box in a gray, rainy, and incredibly expensive city? On top of that, Seattle's chronic social problems have been compounded. The city center is grappling with a growing homelessness crisis, rising crime rates, and drug problems. Streets that were once bustling now become unsafe after dark. Major retail chains have closed their stores for security reasons. The retail apocalypse is not just a concept here, it is a reality. While all this was happening, what were developers doing? Still dreaming of 2019, they continued to build luxury towers everywhere in the city. Areas like Capitol Hill and South Lake Union filled up with brand new but empty buildings. Demand plummeted, but supply continued to increase. The result? Rents in Washington State are in free fall. Especially in downtown Seattle, rents for luxury apartments have dropped by 5 to 8%. Landlords are freezing leases, not raising rents, and even offering secret discounts to keep tenants. The once unattainable Seattle has now turned into a buyer's market where tenants say, "I'll come if you accept my terms." The rain is still falling, but this time it's not to hide investors' tears. It's to wash away their melting fortunes. Nevada. Ranked 6th on the list, Nevada and Las Vegas are a mirage in the middle of the desert, with an economy entirely dependent on a thread. The Las Vegas real estate market is like the city itself, all or nothing. When the economy is good, it rises the fastest. When the economy is bad, it crashes the hardest. Because Vegas is built on discretionary spending. People come on vacation, gamble, and watch shows if they have money in their pockets. If they don't, Vegas stops. In 2021 to 2022, Vegas was a refuge for those fleeing California. Those who couldn't afford a home in Los Angeles moved here, saying, "I'll live like a king in Vegas." Rents rose by 40%. Contractors, believing this migration would never end, covered the desert in concrete. Thousands of new housing developments were built in suburbs like Henderson and Summerlin. However, by 2026, the tide had turned. Americans' vacation budgets were cut due to inflation. Tourism slowed down. Service sector workers in Vegas began losing their jobs or receiving fewer tips. These people could no longer afford their rent. At the same time, the wave of migration from California also stopped, because prices in Vegas had risen so much that it was no longer cheap. The current situation in Nevada is nothing short of a desert storm. In this state, where the unemployment rate is above the U.S. average, landlords are struggling immensely to find tenants. Vacancy rates in apartment complexes, in particular, have exceeded 10%, which is considered a crisis level for the real estate market. Once a hot market, Vegas is now frozen solid. Rents have dropped by 4% annually, but in some areas, the decline is much steeper. Landlords in Vegas thought, just like casinos, that the house always wins. But this time, they were the ones walking away empty-handed. It's not just the asphalt melting in the desert heat. Those inflated rental contracts are melting too. Oregon. In 5th place on the list lies one of America's saddest stories. Oregon and its struggling gem, Portland. The reason for the rent decline here isn't just too many buildings, like in other states. Here, the problem is much deeper, much more social, and much more frightening. The problem here is escape. Not long ago, just 5 years back, Portland was America's hipster capital. Artists, young people, digital nomads, nature lovers flocked here. The city was safe, green, progressive, and livable. Rents rose 10% annually, and landlords struggled to choose tenants knocking on their doors. But then, Portland's famous quirkiness gave way to chaos. The 2020 protests, rising crime rates, and out-of-control homelessness crisis and laws decriminalizing drug use irreversibly damaged the city's fabric. Downtown streets, once bustling with tourists, became no-go zones that even locals feared to enter. Giant retail chains like Walmart, Nike, and REI closed their stores, citing inability to ensure safety, and left the city. And it's not just companies. People are leaving too. Oregon has been losing population for the past 3 years. Especially the middle and upper classes who have money, jobs, and pay taxes are fleeing to the suburbs or other states. This is where the golden rule of the real estate market comes into play. Where the population declines, rents cannot be sustained. If you want to rent a luxury apartment in Portland today, the landlord will roll out the red carpet for you. Occupancy rates in those modern buildings downtown are at historic lows. Landlords are desperately slashing prices to find tenants. They're not just slashing prices, they're offering 3 months free rent, $1,000 cash moving assistance, free parking. Whatever you want, they'll give it to you. Because the alternative is terrifying. The risk of the building standing completely empty and being squatted in by homeless people. Looking at the data, we see that rents have fallen by over 5% across Oregon. However, in downtown Portland, this figure is 8%, and in some troubled neighborhoods, it reaches as high as 12%. This is not a market correction. This is the economic cost of a city's social suicide. For investors, Portland is now a no-go zone. For tenants, it's a dystopia where, if they can stomach the chaos, they can live in luxury apartments at unbelievably low prices. Colorado. Ranked 4th on the list is Colorado, the highest state in the U.S. and a haven for nature lovers, along with its rapidly urbanizing capital, Denver. Colorado's story is a textbook example of greed and miscalculation. Over the past decade, Denver was one of America's most popular boomtowns. Everyone who was tired of California, wanted to be close to nature but couldn't quite leave city life behind, flocked to Denver. Tech companies opened offices here, salaries rose, and rents skyrocketed. What did the developers think when they saw this? This demand will never end. And they launched the biggest construction push in Denver's history. They built massive apartment complexes everywhere, not just downtown, but in Aurora, Lakewood, and at the foot of the mountains. Denver's skyline became more synonymous with cranes than mountains. However, by 2025, they hit 2 major walls. 1. The limit of purchasing power. Rents had risen so high that they exceeded what people could afford. At some point, people said, enough is enough. They started looking for roommates, moved back in with their families, or left the city. 2. Record inventory. Tens of thousands of apartments that had started construction 2 to 3 years ago were all completed at the same time, just as the economy slowed down. There is now an incredible supply surplus in the Denver market. Contractors are fighting each other to fill their luxury buildings. Concierge service, rooftop pools, pet spas. These are now standard. Now they have to lower prices to attract tenants. Rents across Colorado are down nearly 6% year over year. Landlords are panicking because Denver property taxes and insurance costs are rising while rental income is falling. This means negative cash flow. In other words, even if the landlord rents out the property, they are spending money out of pocket. Denver, once known as the investor's paradise, has now turned into a tenant's market. The mountain views are still free, but the apartments overlooking those views are no longer as expensive as they used to be. The bubble hit the sharp peaks of the Rocky Mountains and burst. Arizona. When we reach the 3rd spot on the list, the podium, we arrive at the ground zero of the U.S. real estate bubble, Arizona. Especially Phoenix and Tucson. Arizona's last 4 years are the stuff of an economic documentary. During the pandemic, Phoenix became America's inflation capital. Rents rose by 30%, 40% in a year. Why? Because everyone was fleeing here. Californians for cheap housing, retirees for the sun, investors for easy money. Especially the algorithmic home-buying companies we call iBuyers, and Wall Street giants turned Arizona into their playground. They scooped up thousands of homes from the market, inflated prices, and rented them out at exorbitant rates, thinking, rents will keep going up anyway. Phoenix turned into a veritable investor casino. But the desert's rule is simple. When the water runs out, life ends. In the real estate market, it's when demand ends, the party ends. That's exactly what's happening in Arizona as we enter 2026. The party's over, the lights are on, and everyone's left holding a bursting bubble. Why? 1. Logistical collapse. So many apartments were built in Phoenix that the city now has the highest vacancy rate in its history. Developers filled every square inch of the desert with concrete. 2. Investor flight. The Wall Street firms that snapped up those homes now can't find tenants. With high interest rates, the cost of holding on to those properties has increased. Now they are either selling them at a loss or dramatically lowering rents. 3. Climate reality. Rising temperatures and rumors of a water crisis are calling into question Arizona's long-term appeal. The results are clear. Rents in Arizona have fallen between 6% and 8% compared to last year. In some areas, rents have fallen below 2022 levels. Landlords are in shock. This was the fastest growing city in America. What happened, they say? What happened is this: growth has hit a ceiling. On Phoenix streets, you can see flag-waving men in front of apartment buildings and mascots holding signs. They're all there for one reason: please come in and sign a lease. For investors, Arizona is like an ice cream melting under the sun. The faster they consume it, the better, or else they'll be left with nothing but a sticky mess. But for tenants, after years of that hellish heat, a refreshing breeze is finally blowing. Florida. In second place on the list is the Sunshine State. But right now, dark clouds are gathering for investors. Florida. Florida's story is much more complex and dangerous than that of other states. Because here, the problem isn't just too many houses being built. Here, nature, economics, and greed have combined to create a perfect storm. Let's start with real estate. During the pandemic, Florida was America's #1 migration route. New Yorkers flocked here to escape taxes. Retirees came for the warm weather. Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, and Miami. In these cities, rents increased by 40%, 50% in 2 years. Seeing this, literally everyone became a real estate agent in Florida. Teachers, police officers, retirees. They pooled their savings and bought houses to do Airbnb. Their goal was to rent out homes to tourists visiting Disney World or the beach for $300 a night. But as 2026 approached, this dream collided with two major nightmares. First, the Airbnb bubble burst. The market became so saturated with rental properties that the number of tourists couldn't fill them all. Homeowners were forced to convert their vacant homes into long-term rentals. This suddenly flooded the market with tens of thousands of new rental properties. The second and most important one, the insurance apocalypse. This is the real disaster that sets Florida apart from the rest. Due to hurricane risks, insurance companies are leaving the state or increasing policy prices by 400%. The annual insurance for a home has reached $10,000. Homeowners cannot afford this cost. They cannot sell their homes either, because no one will buy an uninsured home. What is their only option? To rent it out at any price. Right now in Florida, especially in areas like Jacksonville and Orlando, homeowners are panicking and slashing prices. They're in "please just take my house, just pay my insurance" mode. Data shows that rents across Florida have fallen by about 7%. However, this decline is much steeper in apartment buildings or condos. While developers continue to build skyscrapers in Miami, for rent, signs flutter in the wind on the back streets. Florida used to be a paradise for investors. Now it's a sinking ship. And the lifeboats on the ship, i.e., the tenants, are now deciding for themselves how much to pay the captain. Texas. And at the top of the list. Number 1. The epicenter of America's rental crisis. Where the bubble was at its peak and is now bursting most loudly. Texas. Especially the once superstar city, Austin. The story of Texas, especially Austin, is no different from the tulip mania in human history. Between 2020 and 2022, everyone was moving to Austin. Elon Musk moved his Tesla factory here, Joe Rogan came here, and Silicon Valley giants left California and called this place Silicon Hills. Austin became America's coolest, most popular city. Rents doubled in a year. Yes, you heard that right, they doubled. Landlords weren't even looking at tenants. They were renting out homes through auctions. Seeing this frenzy, the construction industry launched the largest housing initiative in Texas history. Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. The Texas skyline became invisible behind cranes. In Austin alone, new homes were built equivalent to 10% of the city's existing housing stock. This was an unimaginable rate. And then, the music stopped. The tech sector entered a crisis. Layoffs began. The remote work trend reversed. Companies called employees back to the office, but the offices were in other states. And most importantly, those thousands, tens of thousands of new apartments were finished. Now, on the cusp of 2026, what is happening in Austin is a bloodbath. There are so many vacant homes in the city that the real estate market has stalled. Rents have plummeted 12% from their peak, and in some areas, 15%. This is the biggest drop in the entire US. You go to a luxury residence, and they say, pay 3 months rent, free parking, no deposit. We'll even give you a $1,000 gift card. Landlords can't even rent out apartments for $1,800 that they used to rent for $2,500. This isn't limited to Austin. San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, Texas's 4 major cities are all facing the same fate. For investors, Texas was supposed to be a passive income paradise. But now it has turned into an active loss pit. There's a saying in Texas, everything is bigger here. It seems that real estate collapse is now part of that saying. This is the picture. From Georgia to Texas, from Florida to Washington, the tide has turned across America. A system fed for years on lies like homeowners always win and real estate never loses has collapsed under its own greed. The law of supply and demand is taking its revenge after all these years. The year 2026 will be a year of opportunity for tenants. The bargaining power is now in your hands. You are now the ones setting the terms, choosing and demanding. But for investors, especially for those novice investors who bought homes at exorbitant prices over the last 3 years, thinking it will go up anyway. A tough winter is beginning. This story teaches us that no party lasts forever, and the economy eventually finds its balance. Sometimes with a soft landing, sometimes with a hard crash like in Texas. So what do you think? Do you think this decline is permanent? Or will the needle swing back when builders stop construction? And most importantly, if you had cash on hand right now, would you buy a home in this discounted market, or would you wait for the knife to fall? I look forward to your responses in the comments. I'll try to read all of them, and your feedback is crucial for the growth of our community. If you find our content valuable, you can subscribe. Until the next videos, keep your money safe.